On the cold, tense evening of April 14th, 1865, as the United States was finally beginning to heal from the brutal wounds of the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln stepped out of the White House with a tired but hopeful smile, unaware that this night, what Americans would later call the night America stopped breathing, would become one of the most tragic and defining moments in the nation's history. Earlier that day, Lincoln had spent time walking through Washington, speaking with friends and cabinet members, sharing his optimistic vision for the future and his excitement about restoring peace, reconciliation, and unity to a country devastated by 4 years of bloodshed. And many remembered that he looked unusually calm, almost relieved, as though a great weight had finally lifted from his shoulders, for General Lee had surrendered and the Civil War was effectively over. Lincoln had even spoken about visiting the South, rebuilding the nation, and granting freedom and dignity to those who had been enslaved. Dreams that would never be fulfilled, because lurking in the shadows of this fragile new peace was a man determined to destroy it. The actor John Wilkes Booth, a charismatic performer with extremist beliefs, burning hatred for Lincoln and a twisted plan he believed would save the Confederacy even after its defeat. As night fell, Lincoln and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, entered Ford's Theater to watch a light comedy called Our American Cousin, and the evening felt almost normal. The audience cheered when they entered, the orchestra played, and for a brief moment, after years of war, Lincoln allowed himself to relax. But Booth, who knew the theater inside out, used his access and knowledge of the building to prepare his attack. He slipped into the backstage areas with his one-shot Derringer pistol and a hunting knife, moving silently like a ghost through familiar hallways, while the unsuspecting audience laughed at the jokes on stage. At about 10:15 p.m., Booth approached the presidential box, where a single security guard had stepped away, and in that small moment of vulnerability, the fate of a nation changed forever. Booth opened the door, aimed his pistol at the back of Lincoln's head, and fired a single shot, the sound echoing through the theater like a crack of doom. Chaos erupted instantly as Mary screamed, and the audience gasped in horror. Booth leaped from the balcony, breaking his leg as he landed on stage, but he stood tall and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," a Latin phrase meaning, "thus always to tyrants," before escaping on horseback into the night. Inside the theater, doctors rushed to Lincoln, realizing immediately that the wound was fatal. They carried him across the street to the Peterson House, a small boarding house, where he was laid on a narrow bed too short for his tall frame, his long legs stretched diagonally. Throughout the night, government officials, friends, and military leaders gathered in the dimly lit room, watching silently as Lincoln's breathing grew weaker. Mary Todd Lincoln cried uncontrollably, and even the hardened generals who had faced years of battle stood helplessly as the life of the man who had saved the Union slipped away. At 7:22 a.m. on April 15th, Abraham Lincoln took his final breath, and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton whispered the words that would become part of American history. Now he belongs to the ages. The entire nation plunged into grief. Cities held mournful gatherings, people wept in the streets, and newspapers printed black-bordered editions honoring the fallen leader. Meanwhile, Booth fled south on injured legs, believing he had become a hero, but instead the entire country turned against him. Soldiers hunted him relentlessly as he hid in forests, barns, and swamps. Realizing too late that he had not sparked a Confederate uprising, he had only deepened the nation's pain. 12 days later, Union troops cornered Booth in a tobacco barn in Virginia. When he refused to surrender, the barn was set on fire, and Booth was shot, ending the life of the man who had killed a president. Lincoln's funeral procession traveled from Washington to Springfield, Illinois, drawing millions of grieving Americans who lined the tracks to pay their respects. For many, it felt as though the heart of the nation had been torn out. But even in death, Lincoln's legacy endured, inspiring the Reconstruction era and shaping the future of civil rights, freedom, and equality. His assassination was not merely a tragic moment. It was the loss of a guide, a healer, and a leader whose vision continues to define America. And as history looks back on that dark night in Ford's Theater, it remembers not just the tragedy, but the man whose dreams for unity and justice live on, reminding us that even in the darkest moments, hope can rise again.